Dr. Mark Mobius, first of all, thank you very much for being here with us today for Dün, Bugün, Yarın, the name of our show, which means yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to ask you, what, as being someone who has even seen the World War II, I know you were a little boy. I believe I've calculated it. It comes to your third age, between the ages of 3 and 9. You have seen the World War II happening. I don't know, what do you recall from those days? I believe you were living in New York then. I'm really wondering what you're recalling from those days, and if this were to be compared with COVID-19 pandemic days, what are your feelings? How do you feel? Could you share a little bit with us?
Yeah, I think it was interesting that you used that similarity, because there are quite a few parallels between what happened during World War II and now. And I remember as a child, there were air raid signals, and we had to hide under the table because they were training us in case we were bombed in Long Island, New York, where I was living. Mm-hmm. I also remember that both my father and mother worked, because my father, of course, was working as a baker, and my mother was working in the defense factory to make planes at the Grumman factory in Long Island. Mm-hmm. So I remember very distinctly that it was very difficult times, but at the same time, there was a unity in the government as a result of the Franklin D. Delano Roosevelt presidency. He created a sense of urgency and unity, which was very, very good. So in some ways, we're in a similar situation now, where everybody now has to come together. They have to make sure that they behave properly in order to defeat this COVID-19.
Talking about your father job, it makes me think of also food shortages you may have experienced during those days, during the days of World War II. Whereas we are about to be living these similar things in 2020. World Food Organization has just announced recently that by the end of 2020, there is going to be 265 million of people who are going to be fighting with food shortage and starvation. And this has already started in many countries around the world, including the biggest economy, US.
Yes, that again is a parallel there, because I remember during World War II, there were very severe shortages of various foods. In fact, we had to change our diets substantially. For example, there was no butter available, so we had to use margarine. And I remember they gave us a plastic bag with margarine, white margarine, and there was a little pill, coloring pill. And we would press the pill and then mix up the margarine with the yellow so it would look like butter. made us feel that we were eating butter. But things like that, we learned to eat a lot of parts of the chicken, whereas previously we used to throw away things like the chicken stomach or the chicken necks. We never used to eat those. Then during the war, we started to eat those things.
I believe right now you're in Singapore?
No, I'm now in Munich, Germany.
In Munich?
I was in South Africa a week ago. I was in Durban, South Africa, and before that in Cape Town. And now I'm in Munich, Germany.
Yes, I know that even during the confinement, while we are still at home, you are one of the rarest people who got the chance to travel. And I've read that you love traveling a lot. So far, I believe you've seen almost 115 or 20 countries around the world. But how does this make you feel, like seeing empty streets, like in a horror movie or science fiction movie, seeing the world capital's streets empty?
It makes me feel very bad. I was locked up in Durban for 2 weeks, and I couldn't get out on the street even. The police would arrest you if you went out on the street. So I feel very, very bad about the situation. Here in Munich, it's a lot better. Things have been relaxed. I can get out and shop and so forth, but there's still restrictions, like we must wear the mask when we're indoors. But generally speaking, it's a very difficult situation.
Dr. Mobius, what do you believe the effects of this pandemic will be on global financial system? I know you've been answering those questions for a while in a variety of newspapers, news channels, and magazines. How do you believe in the long term it will be affecting the global financial economy, finances in the world? First of all, I would like to ask you, because I've interviewed recently Dr. Nouri Al-Rubini, and he made a quite pessimistic scene. And he said that this were the age of destruction and that it might last for 10 years. All along the 2020s, we might be fighting with recession, inflation, deflation, and all these terms.
I'm not pessimistic at all. I'm quite optimistic. And I think by the end of this year, you'll see quite a lot of recovery. The simple reason that I believe governments are realizing they cannot continue a shutdown, because you can pump a lot of money into the economy, but if people are not spending, then there's not going to be a recovery. So you've got to have people back at work. You've got to have people who are able to get out. And I believe they will probably have a system whereby people get vaccinated and they have sort of a vaccination certificate of some kind, which allows them to go out and work and play and shop and so forth. So I think by the end of the year, this will take place. As you know already, some countries are opening up. There's a fear of relapse. But if you look at the numbers, you'll find that if you talk about the total number of deaths worldwide from every condition, you will find that the total number of deaths has actually declined despite the COVID crisis. So I think we have to pay more attention to exactly what kind of numbers are we looking at. We may be exaggerating the effect by blaming COVID for a number of deaths that didn't occur because of COVID.
I see. You've just mentioned, this question was going to come by the end, but because you've just mentioned about the vaccination and a possible discovery of vaccine by the end of the year. First of all, do you believe that vaccine will come out by the end of 2020 and people will be able to get vaccines? Second of all, the discovery of a vaccine earlier than preview, will this a little bit affect the economy, the current crisis we're in now? And third, will you get vaccinated?
Yeah, I think probably by the end of the year, they'll have vaccines of some kind. But you must remember, even if they don't, they are also testing various drugs for treatment of the COVID. So those drugs are already being tested and are tried, and some of them are having a good effect. So there's a combination of two things. One is prevention with the vaccine, and the two is treatment. The other aspect is you've got to realize that there's a phenomenon called mass immunization. In other words, as people are exposed to the virus, their bodies build up their immune system to fight the virus. So many of us probably have the virus already, but have not shown any symptoms because our bodies have conquered or have fought the virus.
So maybe we are already immune for that.
Exactly.
Yes. From the investor side, it is quite worrying to see the extreme volatility we are seeing in stock markets. And I know that when the question of have we seen the bottom yet is addressed to you, you refer to the history of bear markets as a clue to where we stand now. Well, we know that there is never a precise knowledge and prediction as to how long the bear market might last, because there's the chaos. But because you're a guru, I would like to address you this question. What are your predictions based on an immense deep experience you have had in the past, and you have it, as to how long it might be lasting, this situation, and to see the volatile markets?
Well, first of all, I think many people make the mistake of thinking that these bear markets last a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They do not. Our studies show that the average is about a year and 3 quarters.
Mm-hmm.
And many of these bear markets last in less than 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that people make the mistake of measuring the bear market from the peak of the previous bull to the peak of the next bull. And they say, okay, the bear market lasted this long. No, the bear market lasted from the peak to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the bottom was reached and began to move, that's when you can measure the length
Mm-hmm.
of the bear market. So what surprised me about this particular bear market was that it was less than 1 year,
Mm-hmm.
if it's over.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't come down as much as the average. The average decline has been about 40%, a little less than 40 to 50%.
Mm-hmm.
And this bear market was not that deep
Mm-hmm.
for most countries. Of course, some countries did go down to 50 plus. But that means that, first of all, things are happening a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means that we could have another relapse.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we could have another downturn from where we are now. But I tend to think that probably, although there'll be corrections, downward corrections along the way, we will not go back to the bottom that we recently reached.
Last year, 2019, you were in Istanbul. You were the guest of an International Bosphorus Summit here in Turkey, in Istanbul, in our beautiful city. And you sounded being very optimistic with regards of Turkish economy for 2020. And you have announced that you were going to be investing into Turkish technology firms, which you recently said you will still invest. You were thinking of investing. Turkey has well managed with the pandemic situation, preventing its spread, and we're trying, the government has taken it under control with its stimulus package. It's trying not to avoid any unemployment that might be occurring. How do you evaluate the current situation in Turkey, and as to when will you start investing in Turkey and Turkish technology?
Well, we already have invested in Turkey, and we have been investing in Turkey. So if you look at our portfolio, you see we have invested already. And we will continue. I believe that the worst is probably over, and that Turkey will begin a recovery. You must remember that Turkey is a world trade center. It's trades throughout the world, and it's an important economy. Now, it's true that there are balance of payments problems, there are currency problems, but these are problems that can be overcome. And I believe that with the correct attitude of the investors and correct attitude of the people, people are very hardworking, as you know, in Turkey. There'll be no problem. The country will recover.
Do you believe that Turkey could turn disadvantages of this current crisis to an advantage and maybe become a leading supplier within the region, Europe?
Yes, and one of the reasons why I believe that is because, as you know, the Turkish lira has now become very, very cheap against the US dollar and other currencies. So Turkey will be able to export more to Europe and to other countries. Also, you must remember that a substantial amount of product production from China is moving into other countries, including Turkey. So Turkey can solve some of the supply problems that some companies have had as a result of the tariffs imposed on China, and also because of other issues with costs in China that have gone up.
Especially with medical equipment these days. There's a big market which has emerged. and Turkey could be a replacement for China supplying.
Exactly.
Yes. So speaking about technology, what we are experiencing with the use of technology now is to stay in our lives because we use it more than ever. Obviously, there will be a new world order coming in, and technology will be the leading part of this new world order.
Yeah, well, there's no question that the technology is constantly improving our lives, improving productivity, bringing products cheaper and cheaper. So there's no question technology is really hitting us in a big, big way. But you must remember, this technology just did not start recently.
Mm-hmm.
We can go back to the 1700s where technology began to impact productivity and the lives of people around the world. And that's continuing. In some ways, it's accelerating because of the spread of communications, because of high-speed communications, the internet, and with all the instruments that you can use to communicate, just like we're doing now with Zoom. 10, 15 years ago, we couldn't do this. And certainly we couldn't do it free of charge or at the low cost that we're paying now. So this kind of change is having an incredible impact on countries around the world and companies in particular. So companies that have not kept up with this technology will fall by the wayside. And that's the big, big change. So whenever we visit a company, we always ask them, what are you doing with the internet? What is your technology input in your business? Because if they don't have a plan, they could be in trouble.
So what kind of a new world order are you predicting, or do you see will be taking place? Do you believe that will be a more equal, fair, stable, sustainable world order coming up?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, of course, now you have big disparities of wealth, but the reality is that people are getting richer around the world because of technology. And although there may be differences in lifestyle and the total amount of wealth one person has, the reality is that his lifestyle will not be very different from other people. So what we have to do is look at it not in terms of how much money or how much assets somebody has, but how is their life? What are they eating? How are they sleeping? Where are they living? These are the kinds of questions that you'll find that people more and more will look the same.
Sadly, we have not seen any mutual response by big economies out there from the world to COVID-19, but also to the economic crisis by G20 countries. We haven't seen any mutual response, economic response. What are your reflections on this, and what should be G20 countries, nations doing as a mutual response? What steps they should be taking to avoid or to, decrease the effects of the current crisis?
You must remember that every country has to do their own thing, so to speak. They've got to solve their own problems, whether it be a developed country, emerging country, or whatever. No country can depend on other countries to solve their problems. But if you look at the new funding that has been achieved by the World Bank, by the IFC, by the IMF, the US and other countries have increased the amount of capital and loans they have granted these countries, these multilateral institutions to give on to countries that need them. So there's a tremendous amount of work at the multilateral level to help these countries. But as I say, each country has got to solve their own issues because each country is different. In fact, each state within the country is different.
Yes.
I mean, if you take Turkey, for example, what's happening in eastern Turkey and what's happening in western Turkey are quite different. And each of the governors of the provinces have to make independent decisions, of course, within the framework of the national framework, but they have to make their own decisions about how to solve their problems.
So you believe that a global mutual response would not be as effective as responses, individual responses by each country to its own problems.
That's right. Now, what I'm advocating is that there be a mutual exchange of information and technology. That's going on all the time, but each area should make their own decisions regarding what they should do to solve the problem.
With this pandemic, we have seen the failure of the biggest economy in the world, even the USA. We see 22.8% of unemployment right now, which could raise to, they say, up to 25% within a short time, over a period. We see that the coronavirus has just erased within a month of time, in just one month, all job gains in the country, they say, since the Great Recession. What are your reflections on the current situation of the US economy right now? And also, I go on to China when I think of US economy because of the geopolitical competition between USA and China. What will be its impacts on the global current crisis?
Well, you must remember, unemployment is not only happening in the US, but globally.
Of course.
People are losing jobs all over the place, simply because there's no business activity at all because of the lockdown. So that could end very, very quickly. But there will be residual unemployment because there's certain companies that have gone bankrupt and will not open again. So those jobs will be lost. So now the question is what to do. What's the next step? And the next step, of course, is to create projects that will have jobs, that will lower the unemployment level. And that's why I'm advocating some large infrastructure projects for countries that will employ more and more people who have lost their jobs.
Could you tell us a little bit about your solution, advocating more jobs?
Well, it's similar to what I was talking about when I talked about the New Deal. If you remember, during the Depression in America, the government of the US, led by Roosevelt, started what he called a New Deal. And what he did is he allocated an incredible amount of money for the building of bridges, roads, you name it, all kinds of infrastructure, dams, big hydroelectric dams, etc. And that put a lot of people to work. It did two things. First of all, it built up the infrastructure of the country. Secondly, it reduced unemployment and got the economy going again.
Where do you believe that China, the biggest supplier of the world, do you believe it will lose its title? And where do you see Chinese economy in the 2020s?
So China will continue to have a high growth rate. It won't be as high as in the past, simply because the base of the economy is not as big as it was. In 2010, China was growing at 10%. But that amount of that growth of 10% in dollar terms is less than 5% today in China, simply because the base, the denominator, has been increasing such a rate over this period. So China will continue to have a high growth rate, I believe, and will recover from this crisis.
So far, which country would you say has did the best for economy-wise? Would you say, for instance, Germany, because they did, do great. They were a great model during the 2008 crisis with their Kurzarbeit model. Which country do you believe can be shown as a role model during this crisis?
You really can't name any country. No country is a role model, simply because we don't know what is coming. It may look good. For example, some people are saying, oh, Sweden did the right thing. They're on the streets. They're active again. But some people say, wait a minute, they may have a relapse. So there is no country now that you can point to and say, that's the one that we must follow. It just does not exist yet.
money, talking about money, first of all, how are you investing at the moment? What are you investing and how are you investing?
Well, we're investing in stocks of companies that have very strong balance sheets. That's very important. At this stage, you got to make sure that companies are going to be able to survive without having some business for quite a few months. So that's the number one. Then, of course, you've got to select companies that have good corporate governance, where there's transparency. And as I said in our book, Invest for Good, corporate governance is very, very important. And then finally, of course, we want to have companies that are growing, that have potential to grow. And there are a number of those companies around, as you know.
Where do you see the future of money then? Could it be digital, when especially looking at the emerging economies, markets, and nations? What would you say, for instance, to close the budget gap in private sectors? If you print money, it increases inflation. Which steps should central banks be taking in order to prevent inflation, excess of liquidity, and later stagflation and recession? What would you say on this?
Well, first of all, there is no inflation. Inflation does not exist. In fact, I'm coming out with another book in which it's called The Inflation Myth. The way they measure inflation is insane. It's not a proper way to measure anything. That's the first thing. The second thing is that inflation is when people have to spend more money on the same product, right? First of all, the products are changing so rapidly. And secondly, the money printing machines are working overtime. So if you're measuring it in terms of the money is not the same as it was a week ago or 2 or 3 weeks ago. And a lot of people try to measure money supply. Again, that is a meaningless measure because no one really knows what is the money supply. Nobody knows because you can have money under the mattress and not being used. Is that supply or not? And then, of course, when you get into Bitcoin and a lot of these currencies, nobody knows how much there is out there. It's completely unknown. So I believe the central banks have been making the mistake of thinking that they can help the economies by pumping money into the system, and that is not really the solution. Central banks' job should be to protect the currency, to make the currency credible to the people who use it. Other than that, they have no other role.
In your 12th book, if I'm not mistaken, Invest for Good for a Healthier World and Wealthier You. In your book, I've seen a paragraph on women, on governance and gender, and how you are actually advocate of gender equality and women empowerment. May I read one passage?
Yes. Okay. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So you are emphasizing the importance of the representation of women in governments, institutions, business for the most beneficial outcomes of mankind. Fully including women to these institutions means adding enormous intellectual, creative, and productive assets to all manner of enterprise, while neglecting, I love this phrase, that's why I'm reading, while neglecting talents of women, we are missing at least half of all available brain power, creativity, and abilities. This is amazing. I first of all congratulate you for this. With Corona, we have seen United Nations Secretary General warning the nations because of domestic violence cases increasing. And he also said this was the time governments should prioritize gender equality more than ever. Where do you see the gender equality today?
Well, it very varies from country to country, as you know. There are big differences from one place to another. But there's a long way to go. There's incredible denigration of women in various countries around the world.
Mhm.
And the idea of gender equality is very alien to many of the cultures around the world. So there has to be a tremendous amount of work to be done. And by the way, as a result of this COVID crisis, as you pointed out, with people locked up in their homes together, sometimes it results in domestic violence. But at the same time, now these issues are coming to the fore and they have to be addressed. So in some ways, this crisis has resulted in a greater awareness of these issues, and hopefully they will be addressed as we go forward.
I just forgot to add this. 70% of all global healthcare workers are women. 70% is made of women, and who are fighting out there in the front lines to save lives. They are risking their lives. At the same time, 70% of all agricultural producers within different levels, from level 1 to level 5, they are also women. And 60% of those fighting with starvation around the world are also women. Isn't this?
Yeah, it's quite remarkable.
Yes.
And by the way, I understand that women have a better resistance to the virus than men.
We are resilient.
Yes, that's right.
So we are coming to the end of our interview. I have few more questions to ask you because I know your time is precious. So we have spoken about this earlier, but I haven't gotten any answer for this. What will be your title for the new age? How would you, it will be the age of what? What would you say? How would you name new age?
I would call it the age of innovation. Age of innovation. I think that would probably be the best way to describe it, because innovations are coming so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason is because of the incredible increase in communications. Mm-hmm. And you have a whole new generation of young people mm-hmm. who are much better educated than we were mm-hmm. at their age. So this is quite a very important development.
Talking about the new generation, as a role model, you have traveled a lot, experienced a lot. Who is your role model, or who are your role models in world? And what inspires you most to be the most of yourself? This will be like a message for the young generations. That is the reason why I'm asking, and I'm curious to learn.
Well, my role model when I began investing in this world in equities was John Templeton. Mm-hmm. So John Templeton ran Templeton Investment Management. I went to work with him. He selected me to run the Emerging Markets Fund, and that started me on a very long career. So I would say that's one role model. But the other role model is really a group of people, all those people who are entrepreneurs around the world. We visit many companies, and I admire these people who are running healthy businesses, are improving the way they do business, following the ESG policies. Mm-hmm. These are the role models that I really admire.
Eda, when you look back at your early ages, what do you recall from those days? We started with your early ages, and we're going to end with your early ages, the interview. When was the first time, do you remember, do you recall, when was the very first time you got encountered with economy, markets, or finances? How did it all started as a young child?
It started when we were children. When we were children, you must remember, I was the son of immigrants. My mother immigrated from Puerto Rico to America. My father immigrated from Germany to America. And they taught us the lessons of frugality. Never borrow any money. Always pay for what you have. Don't try to do better by borrowing. And those lessons really helped me a lot over the years. So I would say at the very early age, I became very aware of financing because we didn't have a lot of money and we had to save.
This is an amazing lesson, actually, what you just said, for young generations to, who want to achieve. Very inspiring story you have. It was an honor for me to interview you.
Thank you very much. It's
Thank
a
you very
pleasure.
much. If you have any messages to the Turkish public and our Turkish viewers, please feel free to share.
Well, all I want to say is that you've got to be optimistic. The world belongs to optimists. And don't be pessimistic about what's happening. Things will turn out better, and we will move on to much better and bigger things going forward.
Will you write about COVID, about these times in your next book?
Maybe I will touch on it, yes, if I can get enough facts. The problem is getting the facts.